And joining us for perspective now is Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. He is former Indian ambassador and the author of Karachi Halwa, a book on his diplomatic experiences during the rule of General Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan. He's now joining us. He's on the screens. Well, Ambassador, welcome to DD India. Good to see you after some time. Just look at the toll that the security crackdown on protests in PoJK has taken. 5 protesters were shot dead in Muzaffarabad, 5 in Dheerkot and 2 in Dadial, and these numbers could be well more. Many civilians are critically wounded with gunshots, and we see, Ambassador, that a similar story of denial of basic rights, repression, exploitation of natural resources is taking place across PoJK, Balochistan, Sindh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But if we talk of POK, do you think that its residents feel cheated that first the territory was forcibly occupied by Pakistan and then the quality of life that these occupiers gave them has been at subhuman levels?
Well, Munmun, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You are absolutely right in pointing out that the discontent in the Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, or POJK, stems from a combination of long-standing political marginalization, severe economic hardship, and a lack of basic rights. Now, this has fueled persistent protests against Pakistani rule. The current situation is the result of many decades of neglect and unfulfilled promises. The region has historically lacked democratic norms and fair representation, leaving many residents without a channel to voice their frustrations. Now, as a result, violent protests have been taking place in POJK, with the regional capital of Muzaffarabad serving as a key center of the unrest. You pointed out that there were 5 casualties which took place in Muzaffarabad. And casualties have taken place in other parts of POJK also. Protests and clashes have flared up in other towns across POJK. So while the violent protests are focused on Kashmir, solidarity protests have also taken place in other parts of the country like Islamabad and Karachi. So in response to the wave of protests, the Pakistani security forces have been using excessive force, resulting in many casualties. This violence has further inflamed public anger and fueled calls for accountability. So let me mention that the current protests are the latest escalation in a movement that began in 2023. It was temporarily suspended because the Pakistan Prime Minister offered concessions in May 2024.
I see.
But peace was short-lived because the promised reforms were not implemented.
Ambassador,
So
if I can
therefore,
pick
the
up
protests-
from where you've just left, we know that these protests aren't the first time that this is happening there. But look at the scale of the protests. The scale of the protests seem unprecedented. They've spread to Islamabad and Karachi. Now in POJK, while some demands of protesters focus on bread and butter issues, like you've been saying, there are others that relate to political structure of POJK and Islamabad's hold over the region, the point about political marginalization that you had made. Now, protesters talk of decades of unmet promises and systemic neglect. There are 12 reserved assembly seats that are meant for Kashmiri refugees settled outside POK, and these are seen as nothing but a political tool to monopolize development funds and distort local representation. Is this anything but remote controlling in an occupied territory?
Well, you know, the people of POJK have been very adversely affected by the sort of rule which has been thrust on them from Islamabad. And the most recent wave of protest was triggered by urgent economic grievances which have become more severe due to the overall economic crisis prevailing in Pakistan. Let me mention that a major flashpoint has been the skyrocketing cost of essential goods, particularly heavily subsidized wheat flour, which is adversely affecting people in POJK. And there are also concerns about the fact that while the region generates significant hydroelectric power from the Mangla Dam, yet residents face inflated electricity costs, and severe power outages. So there is a feeling of great discontent, and the people there feel that Pakistan has systematically exploited the resources of PoJK
Yes,
without
that's one story
adequately
that's not just
compensating the
limited
local
to
population.
PoJK. That story is not limited to PoJK. That story is something which is reflected in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in Sindh. There is one thing that is said by protesters and the residents of all these regions, and that is that all the resources are being taken away, they are being stolen by the federal government for the state of Punjab because of the political weight that Punjab carries in elections. But having said that, if you look at the Indian position on PoK, since you've served there from the Indian side, it is said that this is the world's longest illegal occupation, and the Kashmir issue will be resolved only with the return of the stolen part of Kashmir. For the brutalities inflicted on innocent civilians, which that we are seeing today and over the past few days, India is demanding that accountability be fixed on Pakistan. Now, does that resonate with the aggrieved people of PoJK, and do you see the dissent only growing louder with time, even though there's a crackdown?
Well, Munmun, first of all, let me clarify that I was focusing only on PoJK because that is what you had wanted me to do. Of course, there is discontent across Pakistan, particularly in Balochistan, which is seeing an armed uprising, and also in PoJK. But since we were focusing on the PoJK, let me mention that India's position has been very consistent. India has reiterated its long-standing position that PoJK is an integral part of India. And therefore, we hold the Pakistani government, which is an illegal occupation of PoJK, to be responsible for this systematic and horrific human rights violation situation. Let me also mention that MEA means the External Affairs Ministry, has described the unrest as a natural consequence of Pakistan's oppressive approach and systemic plundering of resources. Let me also add that, voices within Pakistan are calling out the authorities of that country and speaking out against what they are undergoing. Shaukat Nawaz Mir, who is a senior leader of the Joint Awami Action Committee, which is spearheading the protest, compared the Pakistani army and the government to a witch bent on killing people and accused them of crushing the very population they claim to represent.
Can I take this forward, Ambassador? Can I take this forward with a supplementary question? What kind of country uses military on its own people? Because like in PoJK, Pakistani rangers were deployed as per some reports, and there is also a phone and internet blackout to crush the movement there and isolate the protesters. 3 million are under siege in PoJK and 2 million abroad have lost contact with their families. So what does it say of the breed of governance there?
Let me say that this usage of the term Azad Kashmir, which the Pakistanis do, is a total misnomer, because the so-called Azad Kashmir is not free at all, but it is shackled by decades of exploitation and repression. And that is what the people of that part of Pakistan are undergoing, as also the people of Balochistan and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. There is a total domination by the armed forces, which have the majority of Punjabis. So it is a Punjabi-dominated rule, both in the civilian government and in the armed forces, which leads to oppression of other nationalities who are part of Pakistan, like the Baluchis and the Pakhtuns, and of course, the Kashmiris. So as Shaukat Mir said, the struggle is not against an individual, but against an entire system. And of course, India has said that Pakistan must be held accountable for its horrific human rights violations.
Yes, Ambassador, towards the end, each year, as per the reports that I've gone through, dozens of cases are reported of arbitrary detention, torture, deaths in custody within PoJK. Many abuses go unreported, and that's because of fear, we know. There's lack of access for investigators in some cases. There's also censorship in many cases. Is this a classic case of how a failed, imploding state and a military dictatorship in disguise operates?
Yes, it is a failed state. Everybody knows that. And now the misdeeds of Pakistan are coming out in the open before the rest of the world. Let me mention at the 60th session of the UN Human Rights Council, which was held in Geneva, the political activists from PoJK and Gilgit-Baltistan raised concerns about human rights violation and about the sort of oppression which they are undergoing. So Pakistan cannot hide its misdeeds. And in fact, there have been protests also in the United Kingdom by Kashmiri activists who are speaking out against the misrule of the Pakistani authorities. So Pakistan is being exposed. It is not only a failed state, but also a villain in the eyes of people who keep a watch over human rights issues.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Ambassador, pleasure having you on DD India. And thanks for your inputs on the ongoing protests, which are only growing bigger by the day and expanding even outside PoJK against the oppression of the Pakistani government.